All right. Welcome to another episode of Mixology, where we are meeting with amazing go to market leaders on how we are crafting unique go to market strategies to help build better businesses, but build better teams, man. So I'm really excited to have Adam here today, founder of RB2B. Been doing some really amazing stuff with you as a partner, but I want to dig deeper today with you, man, because I feel like you've really tapped into one of the subjects we're going to talk about, and it's about like how non-scalable tactics can really drive scalable business growth. So first off, kick off. How you doing, man?
I'm so good. We were just talking about this before the show. I had my second child 4 weeks ago. I took 3 weeks off, and I took no time off last time, which was stupid. I should have. My wife I'll never hear the end of that one. But took almost a month off this time, and it was magical and it was great. And I came back. The business was growing faster while I was gone than before I left, and then it slowed down right when I got back. Not by much, but I just want to make that observation. When I'm not around, things go faster. When I am, they slow down. That's why I'm going to take that's why I'm going to take a massive amount of time off next year. That's my justification. It's hurting all of you guys to have me around. So I'm looking at probably a week a month that I need to be gone.
We're about to see Adam's LinkedIn status update to gone on sabbatical.
Yeah, totally. Stuff would skyrocket, I'm sure,
Well, man, I'm glad you don't have the zombie eyes. I know that's the typical. I usually get zombie eyes after the kid, after week 4. So you're ahead of me, man. It's a marathon, not a race, as we always say.
Exactly.
So, man, to kick things off, for the audience, can you explain what we mean when we talk about non-scalable tactics and why they actually matter, especially for early stage businesses?
Yeah. So look, I mean, where my head goes, I think a huge mistake people make in 0 to 1 is they start growth hacking way too early. It's I got this SaaS for an agency, and the churn is it's a 3-month LTV, but I got this VA in the Philippines and I'm wondering what I can do with cold email or whatever. It's that is not going to help you, right? So I think this topic may not be exactly that, but it's very closely related to that and how early stage founders view these tactics that work for people who are farther along that will definitively not work for them, even if they try, and they probably are trying and it's not working, which is why they're cheating, I think. So yeah, that's sort of my backdrop. In the fundamental principle underlying that, and I will go to my grave with this one. When you have product market fit, or another way to say that is when you have incredibly strong word of mouth, everything that you do will work. When you do not, nothing you do will work, right? The only way to achieve word of mouth or product market fit is to do unbelievably, incredibly manual things until you start getting a couple referrals a week, and then a couple referrals a day, and then five inbounds a day. And then all of a sudden, if you're getting 5 to 10 inbound purchasers per day, then you can do anything that you want and it will work, right? So that's where I'm starting with this conversation. And then there's a million manual things that I have done, I am doing right now, even with RB2B. RB2B, it's gone 0 to 3.5 million in 7 months. I still think the product is terrible. I don't think it's even usable for who I consider our ICP visitor. All of my day is spent doing incredibly manual one-to-one conversations about trying to figure out the problems people have with this thing and deciphering whether or not what they are suggesting as the solution, how biased that is by the way that the product works right now. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I'm glad that you started off that way, man, right? Because yes, we are going to talk a little bit about growth hacking, but I think you hit the nail on the head around the difference between growth hacking versus non-scalable tactics. And I think to your point, non-scalable tactics are essential, especially as you're figuring out that PMF, especially as you're figuring out that 0 to 1, and even part of that transition of 1 to 10. So break it down a little bit more, especially when you talk about non-scalable tactics, what are some of the things outside of just like manually calling, meeting with people, like what are some of the things that you've had to do when building your business? I know there's things like I can think of the top of my mind from when I was building businesses or even launching markets like for Uber. But just for the audience so they can get a firm grasp, like when you talk about non-scalable tactics, what do you
Yeah,
mean?
3 stories. Story number 1. I'm friends with the guys who started BarkBox. People probably know what BarkBox is. If you don't, it's a monthly gift box for your dog. They're a public company. In 2012, when I was starting my first startup, guy Matt Meeker has a Great Dane in Manhattan. Pet stores in Manhattan are tiny. They all sell tiny dog toys because they're tiny stores, literally. And people have small dogs in Manhattan. Great Danes rip through the toys. He's like, this blows. The guy had not even created a website. He created the Photoshop image of a website, went to Washington Square Park, walked around to every person with a big dog, showed them this Photoshop of a website and said, if I send you 5 big dog toys per month, will you pay me $30? And then they said yes. He'd stick his Square credit card swiper in without even a website. He swiped 50 credit cards for $30 a month, and now it's a public company, right? That to me is like the perfect example of doing a thing that does not scale that leads to a scalable business, right? It's the best indicator of all time of product market fit is someone who's willing to pay you for something that does not exist, in my opinion. So like that was number 1. I just had Dave Rogan-Moser, who's a founder of Jasper AI, in this studio. And the way that he started his first business was they kind of had this product. He was in the affiliate marketing and coaching space. And it was all about conversion rate optimization in that space. It's like drive traffic to a landing page and get them to buy your like whatever, like your $99 thing, and then try to upsell them, whatever. So they figured out that by showing so-and-so from Minneapolis has bought this, it's like this social proof widget, right? Like it helped conversion rate of these pages. He made a list of the top 50 coaches and he went around super manually and just got as many of them as possible over the course of 6 months to use it. And then within this echo chamber of coaching, once about 5 or 10 of them were using it, that everybody looked up to, that made everyone think that everyone was using it, so they needed to too. So it like created this inbound machine, right? So like another very manual thing that led to this, sort of business that, and Jasper sort of kind of came out of it in a weird way. But yeah, that's another thing that comes to mind. The third is there's this entrepreneur named Nathan Barry, who I love. He's in the email marketing space. In 2014, there were like 3 annoying things about MailChimp for bloggers. You couldn't tag a contact. MailChimp, they charged you twice when you like put a contact on 2 different lists. There were like 3 like very simple things that they were all pissed off about. So he fixed those. And then the first thing he did was he went to the top 3 food bloggers and he said, I made an email tool for food blogging. What pisses you off about MailChimp? And then they would tell him these 3 things. And he's like, by the way, my email tool for food bloggers, it fixes those 3 things. So then he got the top 3 food bloggers on it. Then he went to the next 20 and he said, I made an email marketing tool for food bloggers. Food blogger XYZ, who you know and respect and want to be, are using it. You should use it too. And it just created this. It was an incredibly manual thing that created this ongoing vehicle. And that dude 10 years later to this day still says he sends 10 outbound email messages a day trying to get people on. Still does today, right? Like, so as far as I have ever heard and understood, this is the type of manual work that gets businesses off the ground. If you look at our B2B, you're like, oh, the reason that's working is because of Adam's founder brand. What I talk about, but you may have missed, is that Santosh and I did 300 discovery calls between October 15th and March 1st of 24 when we launched the product over 5 months, right? Unbelievable amount of intelligence gathered. Like the LinkedIn sped it up and it made the calls easier to have. But the only reason it's going as well as it is because we like got so many points of validation of like, well, who are we, originally it's like, this is a tool for salespeople. Wrong. It's for market, right? Like it's for marketers. Like all of that kind of stuff needs to get found out through incredibly manual work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just, I cannot emphasize that enough. Like the role of the early stage founder is to do things that do not scale, right?
I love that. I
Period.
always say like, I always say is like, do things that are not scalable in order for them to become scalable.
Yep.
Right. Like plain and simple. And I love that you ended it with like what you did on your really discovery side, right? Of like actually building out RB2B. Because the one thing I didn't want people listening to is thinking like, oh, I got to go do some crazy shit in order for this to actually work.
Yeah, I got to
And
go get
those are
someone to
always
send
the
me a
fun
cease and desist
stories.
or whatever.
Yeah, like you always like, of course, like you hear like the famous one of like Airbnb, where like just to make sure that they had operating capital, right? Is like they made the Obama O's. Like you always hear those crazy stories, but I think you broke it down perfectly because I've done enough go to market launches where like the bane of my existence is when I ask, well, how many customer interviews have we done? And it's just quiet. It's
Yeah.
like, well, we hired this company to like do market research for us. I'm like, no. Like, how many of
Yeah.
our customers do
Yeah.
we talk to? And so, like, flipping the script on that, right, is like, I'm sure you also have some good stories of like what not to do. And so, what are some of the things, like, if you could give anybody any advice of like, stop paying attention to this and pay more attention to this to actually like build your business?
So I was getting interviewed this morning by this guy who is a RevOps agency. He's kind of he's just like, I'm a fan and I want to ask you some questions that people don't normally ask you. And he basically asked me something like this. And for 15 minutes, the only thing that I talked about was different ways to improve your product and like how you go about doing that, right? And like how manual it is and all of this stuff. And then at 15 minutes, he stopped me. He's like, dude, this is mind blowing because like ask you a question about how to get marketing to work basically. And like you answered it and all you talked about was product. So like that's for me what it is. It just comes back to this idea that like if you have like look, you need a banging product and banging marketing to like really create this heat. Like when he said that, I'm like, dude, like if I were trying to sell something like a CRM that's just like HubSpot, but like you should buy it from me because it's Adam, my founder brand wouldn't work as well. You know what I mean? Like they're both working off of each other. It's like this viral content and a viral core offer, and like the business growing so fast is giving credibility to the founder brand content, which like brings people back to the product and like all, you know, the whole thing. But like at its core, I think that the biggest mistake is just like trying to do things too early, right? Like talking to users is literally everything. That is a mistake that people make, right?
I always love it whenever I do hear a problem and they're like, oh, like we can't figure this out one. And you're just like, cool, go talk to the customer.
Right.
The customer is always going to tell us what they like, what they don't like, but like we
Totally.
don't ask enough. And I think you really hit a good one too, man, is like doing non-scalable tactics is great, but unless you build that feedback loop, which is what I'm hearing you say, and I'm a big person, like anytime I like take over a revenue organization, I'm like, cool, where's the feedback loop? Where's the feedback loop
Yeah.
between sales and marketing? Where's the feedback loop between sales and product and marketing? Because all of those, especially if you're a product-led organization, if they're not communicating and on the same page at all times, marketing is telling your customer one thing, product is delivering a different experience, and then sales is probably selling a completely different value proposition at the same time too.
Right.
And so I think you had a really good one. Is it's not just about doing the manual hard things, but it's like, how do we actually make sure those are connecting to where we're ultimately bringing value back to the customer at the end of the day?
Totally. And that it's hard, man.
It is.
Well, yeah, it's like the bigger the company. So like what's interesting about my situation is like we have retention.com, which has been around for 5 years and is 22 million ARR. It's sales led, it's annual deals. It's like, you know, 30 to 50K ACV, which is not huge, but like totally different than this like $300 click to buy PLG motion that has 5 people, right? And it's all these people I've worked with for 10 years. And like we have like osmosis of information flowing between us. right? Like, and man, we went from like the size we are now to like 50 people at that other organization really quickly. And we didn't have those feedback loops. And like, it's hard. I mean, it is like very hard to get information flowing correctly and like to get people focused all on things that are going to move the needle. And like, man, it's tough. It's just like,
Man, it is. It's, I feel like we're going through this transition right now to where like the golden era of SaaS has like died.
mm-hmm.
Where now I think we're being forced is like we used to, I think everything was solved with another person. And to your point, like what you're talking about is like, well, the feedback loop isn't there, but we just kept adding people. And so we just kept adding to the problem.
Yeah.
And where now I think where you're seeing so much of this more efficiency when done right is it's fewer people because we actually have the tools at hand too to actually help us optimize that feedback loop and really like move a lot quicker. And so I got a follow-up question to that, man, is like the early stage is great, but like what have you used as like your signs of like, hey, we're starting to enter that transition phase, right? Because ultimately you do hit a point where you're like, we can't keep doing it this way because it's not scalable. Now we got to start thinking about how do we transition to make this scalable. What are some of the signs that you look for when it's like, boom, there's a flag. Let's look into this.
So this is a shortcoming that I have. My instinct is to like stay way too small for way too long. What ends up happening is people are just wildly drowning in activity. You know, like when you run an organization like that, the benefit I think is you're forced to prioritize only the most important thing. So it's like the opposite of the bloat that most companies feel. Like my retention.com got to 12 million ARR with 6 people. At one point,
awesome.
When we started scaling, we had 15 million ARR and we had 55, right? Like now we have 40 and it's 22 million ARR, right? But like 12 to 40 and 10 million ARR, it's like what will happen to me again with our B2B is it will get to this point where it's like, dude, like this is absurd. Like this is ridiculous. There's way too much going on. Like we need to figure out how to just, and there's all sorts of like sort of, well, okay, if you removed Tate from this, then it would die. If you moved Adam from this, then it would die. If you moved Rob from this, then it would die. So to me, it's like a combination of getting to a point where, it's like, who cares when it's a few million ARR, but like you get above 10, there's some EV to this thing. Like if somebody gets hit by a bus and it's over, and that would really upset, I mean, of course, there are personal reasons that you would get really upset, but like, if that would really upset you for a lot of other reasons, like a sort of financial, like whatever, then that's a good sign. But I think there's this other part of it where it's like in the beginning, you have this low market with the kind of companies I like starting, they're new spaces and people think it's a new thing and there's a low level of awareness. So in the beginning, it's very inexpensive to acquire your first set of customers. There comes a time in every company's journey where you need to go out and find the people that you want. So I think that's actually a pretty natural inflection point. If you're like, there's a good enough TAM to go do it, I need to go find these 2,000 people to pay me $100,000 a year for this. There's no other way than to build a company that can do that because you can't do that just cold emailing from, you know what I mean? Like the word of mouth won't do it for you. And you can't do that just being 5 people sitting at home. So those are the two indicators for me that it's time to like actually build a company around this thing and not just be this like, fly by the seat of your pants, 5-person, whatever show.
Oh yeah. I always look at it as like building the engine, right?
Mm-hmm.
I need to make sure I'm involved as the mechanic of actually building that engine.
Yeah.
But once we're at the point where it's like, hey, we actually just need to like tweak these bolts here, make sure it's like lubricated. Like that's when I'm like, okay, now it's time for scalability.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you also hit a really good one, right? Is like going back, I want to keep going back to like dumbifying some of these things, right? Because I don't want anybody listening to take this as like, oh, I got to go figure out like all these different ways to like scale this business. But I think you talked about the TAM piece, right? Like that's a real important one. Is it goes as simple as go talk to your first 100 customers, right? Very manual. And then once you figure out what your actual ICP is, then it's a lot easier to like automate that and scale that and build a scoring machine and build an actual way of using different tools to like, how do I actually enrich all this data? But I think to your point too, is a lot of times I see early stage founders spend way too much time trying to build the bells and the whistles and the tools to like scrape that data rather than just go do the manual stuff, validate it, and then you actually know exactly what you're telling the engine that you're building how to actually go and identify that stuff. And
Could
so I think you
not
hit a
agree
really good
more.
point. Yeah.
Could not agree more with that statement.
So I'm gonna go on a personal note with you here then.
Yeah.
We're gonna go a little bit deep. What, you hit a really good one about retention, whereas like you scaled it to X with a few number of people and then you grew that headcount. Is there anything that as you look back as a founder where you're like, man, I wish I would have noticed at that moment that this was a time for me to focus a little bit more on the scaling and the automation, or maybe I prolonged that too much?
Yeah. My journey's just everybody's journey's so unique. But like I had this thing happen to me where again, I mentioned that I had Dave Rogenmoser, the founder of Jasper, in this studio immediately before we did this. So I shared an office with him and his team for 2 years before they started that company. And we were just these guys stuck at 3 million ARR. And like, I never thought that a unicorn was in the cards for either one of us. And he was down and out. He was about to quit. They gave it one more shot because like, whatever, we're just going to do it. And he sent me this receipt of like over text. It's like, this is the first paying customer. Hopefully this is my get emails because my business was bigger than his. 268,000 monthly recurring revenue after, this was the high water mark, right? Then I watched 9 guys in 12 months go from 0 to 50 million ARR. Literally from a conference room. I just watched these dudes who moved from Maryland and did not go to Stanford do that. And over the same time, my business went from kind of 3 million to like 12 with hardly any people. And I was like, I can do this too. I can, whatever. Like, and at the same time, we had realized that this big Shopify store was like the power user of our thing. And then Klaviyo was going public. So their metrics were getting around and they were crazy. And I was like, oh man, like if we just focus on them, our metrics are going to look like Klaviyo's. We're going to have all this revenue expansion. And like, we're going to go from 15 to 50 million ARR in 12 months. I'm very public about calling this, right? So that did not happen. The churn problem that I thought was going to go from 80% annual gross churn to 10% annual gross churn only went from like 80 to 50. And the revenue expansion that I thought we were going to get, we had a bunch of competitors show up 15 months later. It was actually contraction at the renewal. And I like put a team in place that I thought was going to be a 9-figure ARR machine. I did it all wrong, but like the size of the team could have like done that. And then it ended up being, it's like the low 20s and like we're fighting our way up and like whatever else. In some ways, I like fondly think about the days of when we were 6 people and 12 million ARR and how profitable we were and how few problems there were, but like we were drowning and that was going to lead to burnout and like all this. So, I definitely regret how fast we did that, how sloppily we did that. Like we've been working with an executive coach, 8 of us for the last 9 months. And now I understand what processes are. It's just so hard when you're like an inexperienced founder to know what it's like to run a company well. Those words are easy to hear. They're easy to say. If you've never been like, I was a credit default swap trader at Lehman Brothers for 10 years before I started a SaaS company, which there's no management. Like you're just sitting there. And if you make money, you get paid millions of dollars. And if you don't, you get fired. And that's it. And like a lot of guys get fired. A lot of guys make millions of dollars. There's no in between. So, and no one's telling you anything about how to do that job. You just sort of take it in, right? Like, so it's just such a hard question for me because in many ways I regret not scaling before that. But I equally regret the way that we got there when we went too fast and we had to like fire 20 salespeople and then like we built it all back in product and engineering. And then a year later, we're like, well, this is the team size that we had when it was moving 3 times as fast. And there was all this throughput going through. Now there isn't. So like, now we need to be smaller. Someday I will be able to see the future, but like I still can't. And
I feel like what? No, I really appreciate the response. One, I think it hits in the honesty of like building a company. Every single time. I mean, I've started one company. I haven't started as many as you. But starting my first company, I mean, I learned so many lessons. I actually have no regrets, right? Because every mistake I made was a green light at the end of the day, because I've been able to take that into every single next adventure that I go into, a next journey. I think you had another good one too. One personal one. We'll have to swap stories sometime. So I was actually a futures trader.
No way.
Before I got into SaaS. Yeah.
There you
So
go.
I was on the trading desk, all that fun stuff.
Chicago? Where were you?
No, I was actually in Houston. I traded for an oil and gas company. I did all their future contracts and all their NYMEX swaps. But the other one that you hit, which I really appreciate too, is around, a lot of it revolved around people, right? And I think too is like hitting the processes. Now your next challenge is, you've gone through that. And I would always take a no experience founder over a process driven executive of building a startup. Now the next piece is like, and I'm sure you've gone through this, is when you start to find those executives, right? Because now you got to find that perfect balance, because too process driven, you're not willing to do this non-scalable stuff, or you might be willing, but you might not know how to. And so last question I have for you as we wrap this up is like, to give some takeaways for the audience, what is kind of your process when you think about, I want to try this? I know it's not scalable, but I think there's something there. What's kind of your thought process of like that step 1, 2, and 3 to just get that going?
I mean, I'll walk you through what I did with our B2B. Our B2B is a funny one because I was like thinking about the product. Santosh was always like, you need to sell this to, it's like retention.com is valuable for e-commerce. Like, it works. And it's so hard to imagine a world in which it would work to sell a pair of sneakers and it wouldn't work to sell $50,000 software. The problem that I had was I was envisioning the product being used like the direct consumer product was used. We give them a personal email resolution, and they put this personal email in the sequence, and that person comes in and books a demo and then buys at some point. The time to value of that was like, I just didn't think it was a good product. You know what I mean? Meanwhile, Sancho's like, we got to sell to B2B. We got to sell to B2B. No one's doing this. They're only doing the company level stuff. If they're doing the company level stuff, the person level is going to work. Like, we got to sell to B2B. So finally, after like a shit show of 2023, which I think a lot of people had, like, we had it worse because like we kind of went, we were really whipped high in the beginning and like just a lot of pain. I was like, okay, I've been spending a lot of time on LinkedIn with underwhelming results. I went to my LinkedIn guy. I was like, yo, if I start writing for a B2B audience, how do you think it's going to do? Is like, with what you're willing to share and how hard you're trying, there is absolutely no doubt that you're going to be able to get anybody on the phone that you want. Like, through this motion, like just outbound connect campaign, put out good content. Then you go in 60 days later and you're like, yo, you want to chat? And they're like, yeah. It's like, cool. Hit Ilya. So that was the plan. The plan was really to just see if I could build audience. And I'm not kidding you. I put one post out about BDR and I was used to getting 50 likes. It got 3,000. It was this stuff that I was feeling that no one else was saying. It's like, yo, is this BDR thing for SaaS fucked? Like, that's basically the post. Like, I think it is. Like, we dropped our BDR team completely, fired every single one of them, and then we started growing faster, just whatever. So then I was like, wow, that's interesting. I think I know why that did well. I'm not sure. And then up until this point, 12 months into posting on LinkedIn, I was still struggling with the fact that I didn't know what the machine wanted yet from me. So I remember this clear as day. I was in Santa Fe. It was Labor Day of last year. And for the prior week, I was like, wow, I went viral for real, right? Like, I told my friends, I'm like, dinner's in an hour and a half. I'm going to write 3 LinkedIn posts. If these crush, then I know, then I wrote them. Then I go back to them. I'm like, I think I just wrote some fucking heaters. Like, these things popped, and like, I know what LinkedIn's all about. So like, those pop, and then I'm like, holy cow, I can keep writing these posts. I have a massive path to an audience here. And then we're like, what if we serve this identity into a Slack channel with a headshot next to it. And all of a sudden, like, that's like immediately valuable. You're like, wow, I can't believe that person's on the site. So like, since we had that, and I'd show people my phone and be like, that this person's on retention.com's website right now. They're like dumbfounded by that. So it was a good starting point. And then I just literally started going through contacts that I knew of people that I thought would care about something like this. Other SaaS people that I knew, right? Who I'd talked to over the past couple of years. And then super, super manually, I was like, we don't even have this product yet, but here's what it's going to do eventually, this Slack thing. I want to give you a pixel and I'll send you a spreadsheet every day. Tell me if you think what's on the spreadsheet's valuable. And then originally it was like this dump of just like, some of them had LinkedIn URLs, a bunch of them didn't, and it looked like shit. And people were like, I'm like, would you pay $495 a month for that? And they're like, no, I paid $99. I pay $199, like whatever. And then cleaned up the spreadsheet a little bit. We got like 2 people to pay $495. Then when actually the conversation was like, I'm done sending you a spreadsheet, hook up this Slack integration. Then it was like, wow. Then I was like, I want to give that away for free because that means it could kind of be viral. And I think that like the virality of my founder brand stuff and the virality of this free offer could really like play with each other, right? So not only is it what I did, it's what I would do to, okay, let's talk about another feature. We're about to launch, I'll be 1 minute on this. We're about to launch a feature called Traffic Insights, which gives like, when you look at a LinkedIn post and it like shows you the analytics of the demographics of people who looked at it.
Yep.
So we can do that with our identity tool. We can by title, by industry, by city, by revenue size. We can give you all of this analytics. So to my email list, I was like, we want Traffic Insights beta testers. If you're on my email list, you might remember that email. I got 75 people who wrote back and said they wanted to do it. I picked 20 of them. I BCC'd them on an email. I said, I've picked 10 of you to be beta testers for this, right? Are you down? And they're like, yes. Sent them so there's this tool I use called Snagit, which is like Photoshop for dummies. I literally took the LinkedIn user interface, Photoshopped it or whatever, and I put in big writing, it's like, this is your webpage. This is the type of demographic information it's going to have. And these are going to be the people on the page. Is that interesting? And then like 6 of them wrote back and they're like, yeah, totally. If you made it to where you could compare 2 different pages to each other and stack them on top of each other, then we're talking, right? So like, I kind of, agitated them a little bit and that's what we ended up building, right? But like exact same process, just different way to have the manual conversation. And I think the larger audience you have, the more efficient you can be at this manual work, but it's just manual work. Whether you're having to actually go bang on doors because you have no audience, or you're like me where you have 100,000 LinkedIn followers and I can say like, hey, I'm going to sell coaching tomorrow and I get 1,000 people who say they want it. Like that's a very fortunate situation to be in. Yeah. It's still the same manual process, right?
Man, what I love, and I know we're over time, so we'll wrap this up. What I love that you went through that process though is all about the customer. Right. And the reason I think it's important, though, especially as like a founder and a CEO, is because too often we also start thinking about, well, how do we monetize? Right. We start thinking about price over customer experience, or we start thinking about profits. Like there's so many other variables that, yes, we are responsible for. But I love that at the core of all of your conversations, like, would you use this? Because like as a go-to-market leader, our B2B for me, I was like, yes, like we can finally start to create a better buyer experience. And then number 2, just now when you were just talking about that, I was like, yes, we can now actually start building our web pages to actually be better for the person that's coming to that website, right? Like all of these are very, very valuable things. But I love that you actually went and solved for who is it that you're trying to solve for? Who's your ICP? Totally. And I think that's what everything always comes down to is like, I always tell any person I'm talking to, every problem is going to come down to your ICP. If you know your ICP, you can solve that problem. If you can't solve that problem for your ICP, you might need to rethink your ICP because you might be trying to fit a square peg through a round hole. So
100%.
man, Adam, dude, this was awesome. I really appreciate the time. I know we've got some other sessions together, so I really look forward to it. But I know you had a busy day, and I appreciate you making time for me today, man.
Heath, man, this was great. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the other. I think we got 2 more on the pad.
We got 2 more. We got the webinar tomorrow, and then we have our session on your show in December. So I'm excited.
Dope. Rock on,
All right,
man.
bud.
Thanks a
We'll
lot.
chat soon. All right, brother. Thanks a lot.
Bye.